It was soaking wet out. Been raining for a week. I loved the way it smelled on days like that, kind of like sweet, clean dirt. I was plenty used to those dark, chilly mornings, used to that dusty green haze that hung suspended in the air. I had to go to the bathroom, so I walked down the hallway, but stopped because I noticed the attic door was open about an inch. Inside that door, I was told, was a long staircase leading up to Packy's room. And Packy was my older brother, my oldest brother. And his room was off limits. Nobody was allowed up there except for him. Packy went off to college about the time I was being born. It didn't take him long to graduate on account of him being a genius and all, and by the time he came home to live, I was 3. Being the baby in the family, I just tried to stay out of the way best I could. Everybody knew Packy had snakes and God knows what all up there in his laboratory, that's what I called it. A few of his critters ended up escaping into different parts of the house, too. One time, I had to get something from the pantry for Mom when she was cooking dinner, and all of a sudden, this big, ugly snake came slithering out of the heating duct. Then its split red tongue licked the air, and I screamed so loud and ran out of there so fast, Mom nearly had a heart attack. I could smell the stink coming, leaking out into the hallway through the cracked open door. Man, it stunk so bad I could taste it. I went into Mom and Dad's room and looked out the front windows. Mom's yellow convertible was nowhere to be found, so I was pretty sure Packy wasn't there. There was just enough room, so I slipped through the opening onto the first step. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Sometimes he'd leave for the whole day or even longer, and nobody'd know where he'd gone or when he'd be back, or if he was lying in some ditch someplace bleeding to death with Mom's convertible on top of him. I figured that was probably why Mom was banging things around extra loud in the kitchen that day. She'd complain to Dad sometimes. "Fuzzy," she'd say, "would you please do something about your son?" My poor Daddy. He'd just look ashamed and helpless. "Honey," he'd say, "what do you want me to do?" I looked hard at the attic door, stared at it for a good long time, and asked myself, did I want to do it? Did I really want to go to see Packy's stinky old room? What if he caught me? I scared myself so bad I went back to my room. See, Mama told me once that Packy had something wrong with his brain. I couldn't imagine what he would do if he did catch me, especially if he was in one of his spooky moods. Why, he might even lock me in a closet with his snakes or grab me up with his huge hands. I still had bruises from when I tried to get him out of my room a couple days before, and I didn't bruise easy. He was huge, my brother, and strong as an ox. I looked at the attic door again, held my nose, and put my eye up to the opening. The sun was pouring in bright through a window, and it made light stripes on the dark wall through the railing. And there were about 1,000,000 tiny white specks floating in the sunshine. I put my finger on the doorknob and pulled it open a little bit. Soon as I did, those specks danced and swirled around, reminded me of dandelion seeds floating everywhere when you blow on them. There was just enough room, so I slipped through the opening onto the first step. Couldn't hear a thing once I was inside the stairwell. Only dead silence. There I was, going up to Packy's room. I could hardly believe it. I got scared for a second, thought about going back down, but went up to the next step instead. Spider webs were hanging down everywhere. Then I heard a low buzzing sound, and there, in a dark corner, something was sort of quivering. I looked closer, and sure enough, it was a big old fly caught in a web. Its tiny wings flapping so fast. He was scared, probably. Knew he was about to be eaten alive. And not an inch away, a huge black spider came creeping toward that poor thing. It was just watching that fly, too. waiting for just the right moment to dig into its fat, juicy meal. Oh, I shivered and went up the next step. Ow! My foot was on fire. I grabbed onto the greasy handrail and lifted it up. A big, jagged splinter was in deep. I yanked it out and about screamed it hurt so bad. I sat down on those nasty stairs and held my foot. Then a deep, dark bubble of blood oozed out onto my hand. I wiped it off with an old sweatshirt I was wearing and rocked back and forth. I tried hard not to cry. Finally, I stood up and hobbled up to Packy's room. It was filthy and dark, too. I could hardly see a thing. The blinds were closed, except for one that was ripped and hanging down. I flipped on a light switch by the door, and a measly little naked bulb lit up in the middle of the ceiling. At least I could see better, although looking around, I wasn't sure that was such a good thing. But for an old bare mattress on the floor, there was nothing else except dozens of cages with live snakes slithering around and small varmints making weird noises. And there were lots of giant jars, too, with some kind of green liquid in them. I moved in to get a closer look, and there was a huge, bloated, dead frog looking right at me. I jumped back and fell on my butt. I was shaking all over. Then I heard the swishing sound of Mom's convertible pulling into our driveway. I rushed to a window. Lightning flashed, and there was Packy looking up at his room. I ducked down. Crashes of thunder sent shocks through my body. My heart raced. I limped to the door, turned off the light, and hightailed it down the stairs. When I got to the bottom, I looked back up and saw blood on the stairs. My blood. I didn't have time to wipe it off. I prayed he wouldn't notice, and I slipped through the opening and pushed the attic door almost closed. Then I heard heavy footsteps running up from the first floor. I ran into Mom and Dad's room and hid behind the door. I froze, held my breath, and listened. I closed my eyes tight and felt a tear roll down my cheek. I could hear him breathing. Then, nothing. Finally, Packy must have walked back up the stairs real slow. I could breathe again. I tiptoed back to my room, heart pounding. I plopped down on my bed and thought about what I'd done. I was in Packy's chamber of horrors, and nobody would ever know. I buried my head in a pillow and screamed quietly. That night, Packy came down to dinner, which almost never happened. He preferred to carry his supper up to his room and eat with his weird-ass friends. I snuck peeks at him when he wasn't looking. He ate all hunched over while my sister, Mom, and Dad and I chatted. It was always so strange when he joined us for supper. You never knew what he'd do. When the rest of us got quiet while wolfing down our grub, I watched Packy swallow a huge mouthful of mashed potatoes, take a breath, look at me and say, "Your foot still bleeding, Reedy?"